Talked about these trend lines. This is a linear scaling with NASDAQ. Again, this trend line right here, trying to form a bottom surrounding this level here in the weekly time frame. And again, how we close the week out right now, we're seeing buyers come in at this trend line and the 20-week moving average, just like we're seeing the 20-week being a support for Nvidia. We'll be watching to see how we close, but eventually I think we come back up. I breach the trend line a little bit and then come back up. We'll see what happens. Our 61.8 Fibonacci directly below top fill, and we've got this horizontal support. Should we go just a little bit lower? And with the linear scaling, again, we're coming down towards that here with this week's low. We already hit it last week with the log scaling. We had a bigger drop earlier in the week. With today's rally, we're still only up 1.78% on the weekly chart. We'll be watching to see what the close looks like. This is the log scaling. And I think we can form a bottom in this area or a little bit lower. And then I think we go back to 20,400 to fill the gap. Closed out the month. This is the NASDAQ monthly chart I showed you. Earlier in the week, we were down here with a possible shooting star candlestick. I told you if we rally back up earnings or with the Fed, you can get a doji or a spinning top. We ended up with a spinning top candlestick to close out the month. Still may be that we come back up and test this level and get a lower high before coming down and fill those gaps that I've been talking about. I'm looking for a bottoming process, but we closed out the month with a spinning top on the NASDAQ, a ugly looking topping tail, again, which I believe is the top for the NASDAQ. Video's getting back-to-back bearish candlesticks. You got a shooting star followed by a spinning top. Again, I think you're going to end up bottoming out, coming back up and filling the gaps at 126, may probably overthrow it, and then turn back down. But I don't think you're going to exceed this level. I think Nvidia has topped, and I think NASDAQ has topped. But back-to-back bearish candlesticks, that's what I think is going to happen with the S&P in all likelihood. I think we'll rise up to a new high, but then I think by the end of August, we'll be at much lower levels, and you'll see another topping tail. Nvidia daily chart. Say daily chart, the monthly chart. Now we got again a spinning top-looking candlestick for the S&P 500. If we don't fill those gaps, we can get a big ugly red bar going forward and get an evening star. My guess is we're going to get rally back up to a new high above this level for the month, but I think by the end of the month we'll be lower. So I think we're going to start here, month out down here, or actually right here, start the month out right here. Probably go back lows at some point if they hold, but eventually I think you're going above this level. I think you'll end up getting another topping tail by going higher at the beginning of the month here into the month, but the rally will eventually fail. S&P monthly chart up 62 points for the month, just over 1% higher, gave back the gains from the high. Well, S&P and NASDAQ are both forming these bearish MACD divergences. They've completed them, and we've started to turn down. Well, there's no possible way that's going to happen, but yet we saw it happen. I think we're in a topping process. Bear market comes later. You got to have the topping process first. And I think we'll bottom, and we'll try to rally to a new high. We'll see if last Thursday's low holds or not with the S&P. I do believe, as I keep saying, we're in a bottoming process. Actually, I think we get a divergence in this most recent price action on the RSI. I think we'll end up forming some kind of reversal and go back up and make a new high, fill the gaps. The gap was at the very day of the top, gap down the very next day. NASDAQ, it wasn't that way. We got a lower high, then we gap down. So I don't think it moves to a new high. I think S&P will. Then these divergences are going to play out. Now, I told you, if the institutions keep selling, maybe we don't fill the gaps, but I have the guts to tell you what I think, and I think we're going to fill the gaps. I think we're in a bottoming process. The short term to go back up and fill the gaps. S&P moves to a new high, NASDAQ makes a lower high, and then you get the market being ushered in for S&P. I think NASDAQ's already started it. Please support the channel with the link directly below. It allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you like the charts, you like the indicators, let me know that by supporting the channel. I don't have any sponsors, just a direct relationship with you. Follow the link below. It'll take you to a secure site. You can donate any amount you want. You can take a moment to do that. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you for your consideration for that. Again, I believe, as I keep saying, since late last week, since last Thursday, I believe we are now in a bottoming process. I thought NASDAQ would go lower. I told you S&P might have bottomed. Still may go too low. We'll be watching these gaps now. But I told you I was watching for some green to show up here. We finally got it on the awesome oscillator. Went up to just above the 10-period moving average. Still have a bearish reversal of conditions here. Still momentum is bearish from our gap lower over here. We broke down from the rising wedge. Again, you could still end up forming a divergence before all is said and done. You still may form a divergence on the awesome oscillator and be in a larger bottoming process. This low may hold. We get green and we come back and we get a higher low. So I'll be watching to see how it unfolds, but I do believe, and it can unfold in either way. I don't know the future. I just look at mathematically based indicators, and I'm telling you that we're starting to see green. And often when you see green, sometimes you get the pullback, and we could see a lower high or a higher low. Are you still bearish? It may be we can turn down and we start seeing the histogram start ticking back down and end up forming a divergence before the MACD gets a bullish cross. Just pull back a little bit, fill the gap, and bottom out. Looking for clues. But again, momentum has to shift back to bullish. It's still bearish here for the NASDAQ, but I'm getting signals, warning signs, that a bottom is trying to carve out. Said in the weekly time frame, we're trying to bounce off the 20-week moving average for NASDAQ. You got our red bars going on here. Oftentimes when you get these red bars, sometimes you make your way back up to try to fill those gaps. Maybe our low from yesterday is it. Watching to see that low can hold, but I am looking for a bottom. Thing with the S&P, we're getting another red bar in the weekly time frame at these divergences, but again, oftentimes to rebound and even we could see a new high on the S&P if we can bottom out, go from last Thursday, or if we go a little bit lower and try to bottom out. Things are still bullish here in the weekly time frame with our cloud and our bars. Green bar here, we got rejection at the 20-period moving average. The blue line right there, S&P daily chart here, got above the 10, broke the downward trend line. NASDAQ and S&P. We'll be watching the gap here. We'll be watching to see if our low from last Thursday, which was an inverted hammer, low is it, or if we do a little bit more downside, or we just go back and get another higher low. We'll see what happens. Watching to see if this goes back to red, or does it go into positive territory, or does it remain negative and remain green. We'll get some kind of pullback at some point. The lows can hold. I believe a bottoming process is likely underway. Reversal of conditions. Momentum is still bearish. That can change, but the trend is also still bearish. Here we have on the S&P 500, the bar reflecting momentum, turning back to green. Got a little buy signal there. Unconfirmed. You still have bearish momentum. The momentum line is still bearish. Trend signals are still bearish. The momentum line will need to turn back to bullish if we're going to bottom out. Again, warning signs of a possible bottom developing. Still may go to a lower low. On NASDAQ and S&P, this bottoming signal would need to be confirmed with momentum turning back to bullish. I warned you back up at the top. We had these warning signs here. The S&P 500, NASDAQ made a lower high, S&P got a higher high, and then we gapped down the very next day, and the signals played out. You can see that here, and it shifted momentum. We still may end up getting a bigger move down, but we see momentum and the trend turn back to bullish. I do believe that a bottom is developing. Even with our big rally back up, momentum is still bearish, and the trend is still bearish for the S&P 500. If we go lower, momentum might form a divergence if we move closer to the 100-day moving average, if we try to break to a new low or not. Nvidia does, then NASDAQ will. We'll see if S&P does. Sometimes it diverges. We'll be looking for signals to start turning back to bullish if we're going to bottom out. Quickly with NASDAQ, again, I warned you at the top, the signals were forming. They played out. I warned you with that bar right there that I thought that was the top. Because of these signals, because we were turning off the trend line of resistance, because we had a 9-count sell signal on the 10th, the day of the top. I went through all of it. Turned out that was correct. Now I'm looking for a bottom. Starting to see some evidence of that. Again, a little buy signal showing up here. We didn't flip the bar to green yet with momentum with S&P. We did. Momentum line here, again, still bearish. We'll see if we can bottom out. We'll see if this low can hold right here or not. If semiconductors sell off, if Nvidia sells off, go and get one more leg down, but then still try to bottom. Instead trying to bounce off a trend line. Well, when Bitcoin bottomed, it broke the trend line, but then got back above it. We may see the same thing with the NASDAQ. Possible, again, this is the bottom. You do have a divergence, between the S&P and NASDAQ. So we'll be watching to see what happens with the gap fill. Do we come back and make a new low? Do we have a gap and go, a gap and fill, or a gap and trap? Always watch a gap to see what it is. But some bottoming signals now today with this move higher. That big ugly sell-off Yesterday, we had a gap and trap on the intraday charts. We sold off to the low and then rebounded with futures overnight, getting this gap, getting some bottoming signals, possible bottoming signals here. So we'll be watching to see. Now, the buy signal has to be confirmed. It's not been confirmed. These other signals just could be momentum because they are, X and the B are showing momentum. I'll be watching the gap with great interest. I'll be watching overhead the gap resistance, and I'll be watching to see if we test those lows before the week ends. Again, the buy signal here is unconfirmed. Momentum is still bearish, so keep that in mind. We need to see momentum flip back to bullish and then the trend signal to turn back to bullish if we're to validate a reversal. Going to see short covering. Even if we go lower, I think you'll see more of it. Buy the dip crowd. Do you think we're in a bottoming process? Big rally. We're trying to bounce off this trend line. We've tried to breach it a couple of times. Still may get a bigger breach. If we try to move to a new low, if the rally fizzles out, if the lows hold, we got to see signals start turning back to bullish. Again, eventually, I think we move to new high and fill the gap. I told you Thursday's low, I told you last week, may hold that inverted hammer just below the trend line here. MACDs are still bearish on NASDAQ and S&P, and we're turning down right here into negative territory. We'll see if we try to eventually recycle back up, and there is still risk that the rally fails and we move to new lows until signals start turning back, momentum starts turning back to bullish, and then trend signals start turning back to bullish. Now they're bearish. Quickly, I talked about the S&P 60-minute chart. Again, we actually had a divergence here because the RSI only looks at the close. Okay, and then we got a higher low right here, whereas NASDAQ moved to a lower low and got another reference point of a divergence. But again, we could still see the gap filled right here, or you could come back down and try to take out the low and end up forming a divergence. We'll be watching to see how it unfolds. 60-minute chart, we broke the downward trend. We're above the 50, got above the 200, and we're coming back to fill the gap here. NASDAQ is coming to gap resistance. S&P is coming up to fill the gap at 5556. Actually, I think you fill the gap up here and you move to a new high, but we're probably in a bottoming process. Now, S&P got a rally above the 200 to come back here and again try to fill the gap. We're just underneath it. You broke the downward trend, but we're becoming, again, overbought here. So again, the low may hold from last Thursday if we could just fill the gap if we do pull back. And it may be we fill the gap and go a little higher, test this level or something, and then pull back. But if we end up coming back and back testing the broken trend line, you can get another higher low, or again, there's still the possibility that we resume and go below this level. But I do think a bottoming process is forming. 1.58% on S&P. A lot of earnings. Meta, we had more semiconductors. We'll see how all that impacts the NASDAQ tomorrow and futures overnight. And then we'll be watching on Thursday after the close, more Magnificent 7 stocks. So we'll be watching to see how all that impacts the NASDAQ and S&P. Now, I'm going to show you the 60-minute chart of NASDAQ in a second. But again, we've got this gap higher, short covering, buy the dip, people covering shorts, going long, flipping the trade. Again, I'm watching gap resistance, gap fill, this gap resistance up here, and eventually I think we make our way to 20,400 up here. But as I've said, I think we're in a bottoming process. Might be the bottom. We'll talk more about that. But we still might get one more leg down. I'm looking for clues. It's going to be Nvidia bottom. If it does, then NASDAQ will. It's another push down to support, then it won't. I'll show you the charts. I talked about it at great length of detail yesterday. Okay, we had the earnings from AMD sparking a big chip rally. More chip stocks after the bell here. ARM Holdings and Qualcomm and others. Again, I've been telling you since last Thursday, I'm looking for a bottom. I believe a bottom is going to form either last week or this week, or the low from last Thursday is holding on the S&P, and then we did another leg down, at least the NASDAQ, but I told you sometimes NASDAQ diverges with S&P, and we got that. We completed a divergence here right at the opening bell. We gapped higher, and we saw the MACD turn back up. Rather than roll down further, have the S&P join it, we got a gap higher. And as what this is, you have to understand, keep saying it. You're going to have short covering, going to have profit taking on short positions, have people flipping the trade, and you're going to have the buy the dip crowd coming in. I keep saying it from last Thursday. We are in a bottoming process, in my opinion. And again, this is likely a preview of coming attractions. Actually, I think we're headed on NASDAQ up to this 20,400 level for a lower high. I think NASDAQ has peaked, as I said, back on July 11th. Peaked on the 10th there. I told you that the 500-point sell-off I thought was the peak. NASDAQ moved to a new high, but we didn't have Nvidia move to a new high, and that's again one of the why I think that, among others, resistance levels that I've been talking about and so forth. Turned right off of it, right at that high, and that's what I've been warning you about. And then people, you say, hey, we're hitting a trend line, a couple of trend lines right here, negative divergence, and then people turns, they're shocked, they don't. That's possible. And again, we went up. Again, I told you in early July there on very, very light volume, and then we went up to form this divergence. Continue to believe that this was the top. I'm looking for a bottom now, just as I told you over here. Our top was developing. We got that 500-point drop off of those trend lines in the weekly time frame and the divergence here. Some of the divergences in the daily time frame, I told you I thought that was the top. I think that a bottom is forming. Here I have two scenarios, and the one scenario, I talked about this last Thursday. Again, before I say this, I talked about the divergence on the RSI. I'll talk to you about it in a moment. S&P only, or the RSI only looks at the close. It doesn't look at the bottoming tails. But last week we had that record drop, the biggest drop that we've had on the NASDAQ since I think it was October 2022. October 2022, but it was 2022. Now today we get this big rally back up. We are up 600 points at the high, pulled back off of that a little bit. Closed right up just a fraction above 3%, closing in on 3.5% on NASDAQ, recovering all this. Now we get this record day, the biggest gain that we've had on the NASDAQ since February of 2023. Record move on the NASDAQ today for this week, record move last week, and this is what you see at bottoms. And again, I believe the stock market is bottoming process right here. I think we're going to go back and fill these gaps way back up here, and I think the S&P, as I keep saying, is going to move to a new high. I don't think NASDAQ's going to. So the question is now, I predicted that we go to a new low, at least for NASDAQ, because again, it often diverges with the S&P. So is this done with a 5-leg push lower? Here's my Elliott wave count. Elliott wave is speculation. Counts get invalidated all the time. So it's speculation. But I have this as a possible 3, 4, and then 5. That's my alternative count. My primary count right now is still that we're in a larger ABC move for 4, and then we get one more push down for 5. I told you, I went into great length and detail, and I talked about yesterday that it really is going to depend on Nvidia. And if Nvidia had a great day, what was it, up 13-something%, off the 20-week moving average. And I told you if we can hold up the 20-week, and maybe Nvidia bottoms out, and we bottom sooner than later. But I told you if it goes down to that 97 level, then NASDAQ can still go lower, back down to hit the 61-point Fibonacci. It can go down and hit the gap fill there at 18,653. The 61-point Fibonacci is at 18,400. So that's still a possibility. Like I said, I do believe that we are in a bottoming process, and eventually I think we're headed up here. But if we start seeing the MACD or RSI come back down, again, you might get another reference point of a divergence. You might move beyond this trend line right here, even if we get something really, really ugly. A bunch of chip earnings after the bell here. Some are up, some are down. Watching what happens, but I think you're going to come here to this gap resistance or maybe even overthrow it, and then I think you're going to start pulling back towards this gap, and then we'll see, do we get a higher low or do we move on down sharply? But the wild swings up and down suggest to me that a bottom is under construction. If we go down to that support level on Nvidia, we could still see NASDAQ try to move to a new low. But like I said, whether a higher low or lower low, whatever, I believe, however it unfolds, I believe a bottoming process is forming. Now, if we turn down right here, you'd have a really nice looking neckline. We had a little head and shoulders over here. I'll show you the chart. And we're coming back up and back testing that trend line. Wouldn't it be something if we are forming shoulder here for an inverse head and shoulders? We come down, we get the head formation, and then we come back up and we get this pattern. You get the head and shoulders top and the inverse head and shoulders. Guarantee it plays out that way, but wouldn't that be something if this ended up being a neckline for the top and a neckline for the bottoming inverse head and shoulders pattern? Just something I'm looking at. It's possible we have the bottom in, and this is a double bottom right here, so I'll be watching to see how it unfolds. But I wanted to make you aware that if we did start seeing a bigger sell-off, we're going to get that jobs report, and I'll tell you, Powell's asked about that, that Psalm rule. Talk about the 3-month average of the unemployment rate from a year ago. It's almost the point where either this next report or the next one after that is suggesting to move into recession. He pretty much, I said, well, we're watching. Kind of dismissed it, though its track record is absolutely amazing. It continues since 1970, has predicted every single recession correctly. Talking about the unemployment rate, people that look at the unemployment, it's a lagging indicator. You read it wrong, but if you look at the unemployment rate as it starts to move up off the lows, it tells you, hey, recession is coming, and that's about the time the stock market tops out and begins to the bear market. So Powell's still promoting this soft landing, or still sticking to his narrative. He has to. He can't panic markets. He knows we're going to have a recession. Fed's policies lead to negative outcome. I don't think Powell believes that, but we're going to have a recession. He knows it. He's looking at the same stuff that everybody else, all the economists, are looking at. He's kind of just today in his present, he kind of dismissed the inverted yield curve. Did you hear that? In the inverted yield curve, employment rate, these things are all suggesting that we're about to enter a recession very soon. The Fed was blindsided by the inflation. Oh, it's transitory. Remember all that? When they were going to start cutting in 2023, when they were still telling us that they were going to start cutting rates, or raising rates, I told you they were going to start raising rates March of 2022, when the Fed was still telling us that they were going to start raising rates in 2024. I told you the exact month, date that they were going to start doing it, and I was right. And right now I keep telling you, they're going to start cutting rates or pivot in September. The betting markets, the Fed fund futures, are suggesting that as well, that is correct. And let me just say something quickly about that. The herd believes the rate cuts are going to be bullish. The market has already priced in. The rate cuts, the pause, and we've had that since October of 2023. Already priced in, so it's going to be a buy the rumor, sell the news. Oh, Fed's got to hurry up and do it. When they do it, things are going to be wonderful and great. And again, historically, that's been the signal that ushers in the bear market, that ushers in the recession. We're going to eventually get this move back up, likely to fill the gap at 20,400 on NASDAQ. They're going to set up a lower high. I believe we peaked here. You're either going to bottom around this trend line or go a little bit lower like Bitcoin did. Bitcoin broke the trend line and then it got back above it. So again, if we still go down, we went up to the 10 period and the 50 here. If we get rejection and we still go down and end up going lower on NASDAQ, you could still break the trend line like Bitcoin did, but then still get a massive rally and go set up a lower high just like Bitcoin did. The market is following Bitcoin. I'm telling you right now, Bitcoin's in a topping process. May not be done. S&P and NASDAQ are in a bottoming process that may not be done. The low from last Thursday on S&P may be the bottom, and our low from yesterday may be the bottom for NASDAQ. The jury's still out. Fed meetings, as I keep saying, they give us tops, bottoms, and continuations of the trend. Here we're either going to get a continuation of the trend or we're going to get a bottom. In my opinion, we're going to get a bottom and go back, fill these gaps, and then come back and break the trend line and likely get those head and shoulders, and it looks something like that. But like I said, if my signals remain bearish and we start going down further, then it can go all the way down here on the NASDAQ to the 17,000 area and back to the 240 test. So we're watching, but I continue to warn you, I believe a bottom is developing. Today's rally is a preview of coming attractions of what is coming. Had with AMD, and that helped the NASDAQ, and then Nvidia rallied big time, and it took over, and NASDAQ was up 600 points, and then it pulled back off of that. Was up well over 3%. It was like 3.35 or something at the highs, or closing it up. And here it is again. We don't have to do that. Listen, we're trying to bounce off our 100 period moving average here. Okay, we hit it, and we came back to it. We moved a little bit lower, and we bounced off of it. Okay, we did break this trend line, so that's a plus. But we're stalling at the 10 period moving average. We're stalling just under the 50, and the 10 is right there. We're just looks like we're slightly above the 10 to see, because it's right there at that trend line. From this advance, we've now come back to retrace beyond the 50% retracement right there. Our 61-point fib is down here, right here at just under 18,400. Our gap fill is right here at 18,653. So if we see the rally fizzle out and fail and we still go down, I'll be watching these levels. And again, the 18,400 level. We may not do that. We may. I don't know which way it will play out. You have signs saying that a bottom is trying to form now. Indicators. This horizontal support level too. If we do get another push down and have this rally fail, you have the peak over here at 18,464, and that is right there just above our 21-point Fibonacci and just below the gap fill right over here. So just some important levels. Again, you overthrew the 100 over here. You could do it over here, and if you did, you might see a bottom. You might see this big drop that goes back and fills a gap that gives us a higher low or moves down. Still might try to go higher, but right now we're stalling at that 50-period moving average and this horizontal resistance. And this is what I wanted to talk to you about on the intraday charts. Now, I told you right here, we're stalling with the bullish divergence. We're stalling right here at gap resistance. Okay, we're just under it. We'll probably go up to it, and then we'll see what happens if we turn or overthrow it a little bit. We may not be able to make it to this level. S&P is filling the gap, trying to just below filling the gap, and we're just below gap resistance here on NASDAQ. But that's the neckline. And let me zoom out and show you another chart. This is absolutely mind-blowing. Again, NASDAQ was up 566 points, up 3.01%, so just above 3%. It was at the highs over 600 points, closing in on the 3.5% level, and we gave some of that back towards the end. But look at this. Here's the head and shoulders that we had. Here's our neckline, and that is right at that gap right there. We gapped below, and we're coming right back up to it. So this is resistance right here. This is gap resistance and this neckline of horizontal resistance. Again, maybe you overthrow it a little bit. Maybe if you just turn right off of it, we don't quite reach it. We'll see what happens. But again, I would be looking for a turn in this area. And if you do, you come back here, you fill this gap right here. Can we establish a higher low right here? Or do we go all the way back, fill the gap here at 18,653? Do we come back and hit this level right here? Whoops, wrong peak. I have to go back further to get it. It's the 18,064 area from that previous peak in March. I'm only going back to May here. Wrong peak, sorry. And this target level, if you take this high to the center line right here, this horizontal support level, the measurement is right here at the 18,200, 250 area or so. I don't know that we go down that far. I don't know if this is the bottom yet or not. Now the jury is out. We have to wait and see. We need to be looking for evidence. But isn't it interesting that we had the head and shoulders, we broke down, and now we're back testing, and it could be we get another thing. If you do, if you drop down and you get a bottom, you go to a new low, then you've got a possible inverse head and shoulders that could be setting up at that very same neckline. Again, I don't know that we see that happen. We may overthrow it a little bit and see it turn down. But right in this area, if we do turn, you've got a potential neckline right at that same area. Again, this low may hold, as I've said, but again, I believe a bottoming process is likely forming. The gap higher, momentum turned up immediately. Again, completing the diversions. Now we're becoming overbought, so we'll be watching the gap resistance area. Above that, we have the gap fill, 200-period moving average. We'll be watching those levels if the rally can continue. But again, probably a pretty good chance we're going to test this low at some point, and then we'll see if it holds. But an amazing neckline, and again, that's right at gap resistance. Again, I continue to point out, we're trying to bounce off the 100-period moving average on Nvidia. Talked about it at great length and detail yesterday, right below that. And we hit a low yesterday around $100 there or so. Right here, you have support at 97. You've got the trend line intersecting with there. So if this rally fails on Nvidia and we still go back to a new low, this is where I'd be looking for prices to bottom out and go. Now, it may be that we try to bottom out at the 100 period here and the 20 period in the weekly. We're bouncing off of them. Very possible. I'm a big believer in the 100 period and the 20 week. It's also possible we break those levels and, again, bottom out at these levels of support. I don't know which levels are going to hold. I don't know if these moving averages are going to hold here in the daily and the weekly, or if we're going to come down to this horizontal and rising support. So we'll be watching. But eventually, let me say this again, I keep saying it, and we had a big move today, got closed back above the 10 even. but eventually I think we're coming back to 126 right here to fill this gap, and I think that would take NASDAQ to 20,400. Again, this could just be a preview of coming attractions. We had big rallies over here, and it still failed. Again, I'm looking for a bottom. Maybe in right here at these moving averages. Need to see more evidence of that if that is going to be the case. If not, these other trend lines come into play. Let me just zoom out and show you on the weekly chart. And I talked about this large head and shoulders I think is setting up on Nvidia. I think Nvidia peaked back over here. I think NASDAQ's already peaked. I told you I thought on July 11th, I thought that the July 10th peak was the top because of this divergence, because of the trend lines we were turning off of in the weekly time frame, and a lot of other things, my sell signals that were showing up in the daily time frame. And we talked about that all back on the 11th and the 12th. Predicted a big red bar for the following week. We got it after we got the topping tail in the weekly time frame. Again, I think a head and shoulders is eventually setting up here, and I think you'll end up getting some kind of bounce with the first cut, but then I think you'll get a much bigger sell-off. This is Nvidia in the daily time frame, and again, it led the charge. It closed by 12.81% higher. It closed $13.29 higher. AMD started the move, and Nvidia finished it. And at the highs, it was up over 13. I think it was close to 14% or so, something like that. I watch it every second, but I did watch it quite a bit. But it was up above 13% at the highs. Reasons why I predicted a sell-off with the market is because divergence on Nvidia. But again, I told you the market was going to go higher. Talked about the resistance levels, weekly time frame. These divergences ended up forming what the candlestick looks like by the end of the week. But we're trying to bounce off the 20-week moving average here on the weekly chart of Nvidia. You have these divergences playing out. That's giving us volatility in the market because NASDAQ's going to do whatever Nvidia does. It follows Nvidia. Key support at 97 and the rising trend. So again, we'll be watching to see if we go down a little bit further and hit these levels, or do we try to bounce off the 20-week here in the weekly and the 100-day in the daily. I believe Nvidia is topped. I believe it will eventually move to 126. Today it was up, or this week it's up 3.5%. We're at 117. We hit $100 and we had a big 13+% rally. The question is, does Nvidia go down a little bit further or does it not? We'll see what happens. If it does, then NASDAQ will move to new low. If it does not, NASDAQ may have bottomed. Again, I'm looking for a bottom with Nvidia. I'm looking for a bottom with NASDAQ. I think they're in a bottoming process. Probably not done yet. Either we're going to go back and get higher lows, test the lows and get a higher low, or a lower low with NASDAQ and with Nvidia. Conductors doing the same thing. I don't have time to show you. Quickly, keep telling you the semiconductors, NASDAQ, they're at extremes here with momentum in the daily time frame. I told you we had the diversions back up at the top. And I'm looking for a bottom. I told you we could see that surrounding the 100 period or these gap fills or the 61.8 Fibonacci. Again, I'm talking about those levels in this video. Actually, we're going to bottom out. Now, maybe the bottom's in here. Maybe it's not quite done yet, but I think we're going to bottom out, eventually head back. Fill the gap here at the 20,400 area, probably overthrow that, but not get a new high. I think you'll see that high in all likelihood hold. I want to continue to point out, again, I keep telling you, one of the reasons why I'm looking for a bottom. I mean, a bottom and it's over. Bottom, and then we go back up, form a larger topping process, filling these gaps, zooming down, a much bigger sell-off. I think the bear market's already started with NASDAQ. I think S&P's topped yet. I think S&P goes and makes a new high, but I think that NASDAQ has peaked in all likelihood. Nvidia has peaked, as I keep saying. I said that on July 11th. We're turning off the resistance in the weekly time frame. I told you I thought the 10th was the peak. Thing has changed my mind. If we rally back up, I still think you've likely peaked. On NASDAQ, S&P, I think will make a new high.